Qiang Jin Jiu. Book 2, Other Heroes of Chaos. Chapter 136, Sowing Discord. Shenzhequan spoke with such confidence, as Cha province was not a place that could be secured through sheer military might alone. During the reign of Emperor Yanji, the prefectures of Dun province and Duan province in Zhongbo were the richest and most prosperous. Back then, Shen Wei was in command of the garrison troops of the respective prefectures. He possessed both money and military forces, yet he still could not get rid of the bandits in Cha province. Before Shenzhequan made his way to Cha province, Zhou Gui and the advisors in Tse province had prepared a detailed report on Cha province, and they all unanimously thought that the matter regarding Cha province had to be dealt with strategically. Cha Yu was indeed no Lei Changming. The biggest difference between the bandits in Cha province and the bandits of Mount Luo was that while the bandits in Cha province were still merely bandits, those in Mount Luo had banded together. They not only established their territory but also had plans for expansion. It was clear that Lei Jingzhi, who was hiding behind Lei Changming, was no longer satisfied with just being a bandit. He had the desire to entirely cast off his old self, while Cha Yu did not. Hence, they had to fight against those from Mount Luo, and scheme against those in Cha province. Luo Mu was perhaps not as devoted as Zhou Gui in serving the people, but since Shenzhequan had tacitly assented to Kong Ling's visit, that meant they needed Luo Mu. Having served as the prefectural prefect of Cha province for over 10 years, no one understood the ins and outs of Cha province better than Luo Mu. Your Excellency was assigned to Cha province during the reign of Emperor Yanji, during which you have made many celebrated achievements and previously remonstrated with Shen Wei to suppress the bandits. However, Shen Wei thought Dun province was too far from Cha province, and with Fan province between the two prefectures, it would be too inconvenient and a waste of money for the troops to travel such long distance. As the odds of success were too small, Shen Wei rejected the request. Shenzhequan did not even blink when he brought up Shen Wei's name. I noticed that Your Excellency's position on governing affairs started to change from that moment on. Luo Mu waved his hand and said, "What illustrious achievement is there for me to speak of? The vice commander is speaking too highly of me. I have accomplished nothing after my arrival in Cha province. During the reign of Emperor Yanji, Cha province was notorious for its bandits. That year, Chu capital considered sending officials over, and Zhang Qingshan and I were among those who were assigned. When I came down here, I had plans to distinguish myself and show what I'm made of, but it was too difficult." Luo Mu's expression gradually grew heavier. "During the first 2 years, my objective was focused on reviving the garrison troops. Although Shen Wei did not approve, he did not stop me. The Ministry of War thought that it was feasible and increased Cha province's military budget in accordance to the recommendations I made in my memorial, and from this, I had the Cha province's military garrison troops equipped. I was complacent then, wholeheartedly focused on suppressing the bandits. It was only when the fighting began for real that I realized it wouldn't work at all. The bandits of Cha province can be traced back way before the reign of Emperor Yanji. There was already a group of bandits here in Cha province long before the establishment of Cha province's garrison troops. He province in its earliest times was not as prosperous as it is today, and back then, the Yan clan had not made its fortune yet. The traders who used this route were mostly wealthy merchants from the 13 cities of Zhuexi, and the bandits of Cha province kidnapped these traders to make their living. By the time the imperial court took notice, it was already too late. The bandits had already planted their roots in Cha province and developed into various gangs and factions. This caused the people of Cha province to be exceptionally rowdy, as there were fewer rules and regulations compared to other places. Census registration proved to be the trickiest here, as pretty much half the people had been bandits before and were not considered decent citizens, so they could only be registered as military households. Back then, when the officials of the Eastern Palace discussed this matter in this place, they thought of having these people enlisted in the army so that these people could be part of a regular army. With military fields and a monthly salary, they could just feed their own families and maintain a livelihood, then there would be no need for them to become bandits and violate the law. At the same time, the officials could regulate the movement of the people, allowing them to stay in Qiang province to farm with peace of mind without creating trouble all around, in turn strengthening the prefectural prefects' law enforcement capabilities. However, the officials of the Eastern Palace had made a huge mistake. They were all talk and no action, taking strategies that Zongbo had used in other prefectures and implementing them directly in Qiang province without adapting to local circumstances. The bandits of Qiang province became an official army, but the land was not that easy to cultivate. They followed the rules for merely a short while before they started to leech off the army salary while continuing to be bandits at the same time. They did not even need to feign diplomacy, they would just loot and plunder under the guise of catching bandits. They chased after themselves, forever going round in circles with the imperial court. It was difficult for the assigned prefectural prefect to resist the already well-established might of the bandits, and it wasn't long before Luomu suffered losses and was dealt a ruthless lesson by the bandits. And that was not just all. In the later periods, bandit chiefs like Cai Yu appeared in Qiang province. They spoke of the chivalry of the martial fraternity, and were also willing to spend money to finance and assist their like-minded brothers. Over time, their reputation spread and they became much more popular and admired than all those stereotypical literati. The prefectural prefect was no more than an empty shell that existed in name only. By the time Luomu spoke to this point, Shen Zequan could more or less understand why Shen Wei had not been willing to deploy troops here. Because Shen Wei did not dare to do so. Shen Wei was conferred the title of the Prince of Jianxing, which was just that, a nice-sounding title. In essence, there was no difference between him and a delegated official like Luomu. He was also an outsider. He initially did not approve or oppose Luomu's proposition because he was adopting a wait-and-see attitude. If Luomu succeeded, then he could follow suit. If Luomu failed, he could then hold him accountable. He was not willing to step to the fore to offend the bandits in Qiang province because he knew very well that compared to Luomu, Cai Yu and these people were the real local officials of Qiang province. But times are different now. Shen Zequan's throat felt slightly hoarse and he coughed a couple of times. Cai Yu is currently living off the dividends from the Yan clan, and the money he makes are tears of blood, which bandits in power like them profit off the suffering of refugees. There is no lack of basic necessities like food and clothing in Qiang province, but people dying of starvation is a common sight outside Qiang province. Over time, the common folks will come to harbor resentment. To tell the truth, Luomu weighed up his options and said cautiously, after the defeat of the Zongbo troops, the grain supply in Qiang province shrank to pathetic portions. Back then, the Grand Secretariat cleaned out the granaries in the various prefectures and transferred the grains to Juexi in the name of disaster relief. By all reasons, it was necessary to sign a receipt of loan with Zongbo, but Shen Wei was dead, and Chu capital never sent over a person to take charge. The 6 prefectures each handled their affairs in their own ways. It was an uphill task just to make a living, and they all had no energy to pursue the issue of food arrears. Of course, they could not afford to pursue either. Recent years saw a rise in law-abiding families breaking the law in desperation. These were people who were starving and could see no way out, so they could only sink low and become bandits. Initially, the bandits in Qiang province led by Cai Yu were willing to provide financial assistance to the poor, but then, the Yan clan of He province joined the fray, wanting to make use of Cai Yu's influence and power to push out the Shi clan's businesses in Zongbo, and it is for this reason they came to buy and sell grains. They joined hands and made a big fortune out of it. Cai Yu is now sitting on a mountain of money, and he grew increasingly fond of hearing others flattering him up as he ages. Gradually, he lost the chivalrous heart he used to have. He tore down the porridge booths and grain stores he had set up outside and settled down with peace of mind as the local overlord of Qiang province. Voices of resentments fill the streets of Qiang province. He is no longer the person he used to be. However, when the mighty fall, they still command more respect than the common man. Cai Yu still had some influence left in the south of Zhongbo and in the territory of He province. That Yan Hiru addressed him by also carried a lot of weight. It was hard for those small gangs Luomu had privately funded to make a mark. He could only remain anxious but helpless about Cha province's existing food shortage predicament. A brief silence fell over the room. The partially opened windows offered a glimpse of the orange jasmine still adorned with the dew of rain. The sky was overcast. A long time had since passed, and Luomu was running out of time to remain here. Despite the open windows, Shenzequan still found it stuffy. The teacup under the pads of his fingers had gone cold. He voiced something contradictory to what was said earlier. If Cai Yu is still on his guard, then he should understand that the so-called voices of resentments filling the streets are merely underhanded tricks by the other gangs. As his brother-in-law, Your Excellency can give him a reminder or two in this regard. Luomu was slightly taken aback. He did not understand what Shenzequan meant. Shenzequan brushed the tea foam aside with the white jade-like lid of the teacup and said, "With Lei Changming's death, Cai Yu is the great bandit whose name has spread far and wide in Zhongbo. This is the perfect moment when he is in high spirits. It doesn't matter if it's Cha province or the Yan clan, he will tolerate no one else getting a share of the spoils. What's more, a man in his twilight years fears not being the man he once was the most. If he were to think that the present wrath of the people was the underhanded work of the younger generations, he will definitely not let them off." It was then that Luomu understood. He could not help but think to himself just how ruthless this move was. Shenzequan wanted to make Cai Yu regard public wrath as infighting between the smaller groups of bandit. He wanted him to think that there was someone inciting the others intentionally. Once Cai Yu thought this way, he would intensify his efforts to suppress the smaller bandits in order to tighten his grasp on the money in his hands. The small bandits were already discontented. If they were to be beaten down by Cai Yu again, then their 30% of discontent would balloon to 70%. As long as both sides bore a grudge against the other, it would be hard for them to join forces again. They might even clash and begin throwing punches against each other. The smaller bandits that Your Excellency has previously funded in private can be of use here. Once each of them has been badly and brutally beaten by Cai Yu, you can give them a helping hand and a generous gift of grains. Get them to band together and become brothers that bond together in a time of adversity." Shenzequan finished his tea and motioned for Qiao Tianya to refill it. He looked at Luomu and continued, "When the small come together, they will naturally become a force to be reckoned with. It's just like a group of jackals hunting their prey. What we need to do is not to fight him head-on but to add fuel to the fire and fan the flames." Hearing this gave Luomu the chills. He only had to drop Cai Yu a few hints and he would be able to make Cai Yu destroy himself. The stratagem of sowing discord was not uncommon, but Shenzequan had only been in Cha province for merely one night and he was able to get such a clear handle on Cai Yu. And Cha province already? Luomu could not help but recall Shenzequan's original identity, a Jin Yue. Once we take Cai Yu out of the picture, we will be able to discuss the trading of grains between both prefectures in detail. Shenzequan said calmly. Your Excellency's experience of having to endure shame and humiliation will become an edifying anecdote in Cha province in the future. The fact that the commoners can fill their stomachs will be Your Excellency's most distinguished political achievement. Even in other prefectures, you'd be a local official admired by all. Your Excellency Luo, please watch your step. Goodbye. ******. Soon after Luomu left, it started raining again. Shenzequan rode the carriage back to the courtyard. When he stepped off the carriage and saw the overcoat over Qiao Tianya's arm, he said, "The weather is still warm in the 7th month. There's no need to go so far as to wear this. Why did you even bring this?" Holding up the umbrella, Qiao Tianya said, "I wasn't the one who thought of it. It was Shifu who specifically gave the instruction." Shenzequan strode through the door. He had gotten Ji Qing, who was far away in Jiuxi, to purchase this courtyard under the guise of doing business. It wasn't big and was very old. The front porch was waterlogged, and there were not that many flowers or greenery planted in the yard. Ever since I arrived in Zongbo, I've been neglecting my martial arts practice, and subsequently, I've made Shifu worry. After going back, don't bring up my illness to him. As Shen Zequin spoke, he looked back partially and smiled at Kong Ling. It has also been hard on Mr. Cheng Feng this entire journey. Kong Ling hurriedly deflected the acknowledgement. I saw the lush orange jasmines bathed in the dew of rain planted by the windows earlier when I was sitting inside the house. They are very soothing on the eyes. Shen Zequin said offhandedly. Let's plant some in the residence after heading back. They had only just started up the stairs when they saw Fei Sheng, who had been waiting within, step out to greet them. Not daring to be sloppy in his tasks, he faced Shen Zequin with a smile and greeted, "Master has returned at long last." Shen Zequin asked, "Looks like you have good news to report." "Master is wise." Fei Sheng lifted the drapes for Shen Zequin. "Before I set off, I received the items the Marquis sent someone to deliver over. I know they are important, so I did not dare to stop on the journey and hurried all the way back to deliver it to Master." This person loved to speak in such an ingratiating way. Qiao Tianya found it funny and laughed out loud behind them. He followed them in and teased, "I always find it interesting when Fei the 11th comes, very amusing, and fun." Shen Zequin removed his outer wide-sleeved robe and said, "Let me see." Ignoring Qiao Tianya, Fei Sheng took the items over from his subordinate and presented it before Shen Zequin. Shen Zequin touched the leather bag. It was still cold. The Marquis sent someone to deliver it back to the residence with the specific instructions to keep it chilled on ice. We don't have any ice at home, so we had to borrow from Madame Zhou. A pity it wasn't covered on the way back and melted not long after. Shen Zequin was curious deep down, but he did not let it show before the others. He pinched the leather bag with his fingertips. It was filled with liquid inside. He opened it, but before he could see it, he caught a waft of a pungent smell. Upon smelling it, Qiao Tianya, who was not that far away from them, asked, "Isn't this milk?" "That can't be," Fei Sheng said in puzzlement. "Why would the Marquis send milk all the way from afar? It can't be kept overnight." They looked at Shen Zequin. Shen Zequin did not mind the smell. The corner of his lips lifted slightly in a smile. Sensing their eyes on him, he looked askance at them and asked, "What? Who would dare to say anything else?" Shen Zequin closed it and opened up another box. As expected, there were loose tea leaves within. He stood for a moment and let loose a soft sigh, thinking that he really understood Xiao Qi all too well. Milk was the same everywhere to the others. However, for Xiao Qi, milk from Libei was milk from Libei. It could never be replaced by milk from elsewhere. He saved his own portion, and despite knowing that it could not be stored for long, he still wanted to have it delivered to Shen Zequin. What if it was delivered on time and was still drinkable? They ought to try all the delicious food and beverages together. That was what Xiao Qi thought. The others might not understand, but Shen Zequin knew it best. End chapter. Qiang Jin Jiu. Book 2, Other Heroes of Chaos. Chapter 137, Reading Letter. Shen Zequin was writing a letter in the room, so Qiao Tianya and Fei Sheng took their leave. Fei Sheng felt the itch to smoke but did not dare to do so while standing under the eaves, worried that he would reek of smoke should Shen Zequin call for him later. He stood still for a moment, but when he saw that Qiao Tianya wasn't moving along, he knew what this was all about. "Something's the matter, huh?" Fei Sheng took a few steps outwards, leaning against the banisters along the corridor. "Tell me first, what kind of relationship do you have with that unpolished jade Yuanzhou? We've met before but we're not close." "I have some impression of him," Qiao Tianya mentioned casually. The more Qiao Tianya tried to make light of the matter, the more suspicious Fei Shen was. He asked, Yao Wenyu isn't a court official but a commoner who spends most of the year traveling out everywhere. It's even difficult for the Marquis of Helion to meet him. Where did you encounter him? Fate brought us together. Qiao Tianya did not answer seriously. I didn't expect it either. Isn't this why I'm asking you to help me ask around? As Fei Sheng could get nothing out of him, he gave up probing and reported. Before he met with mishap, Secretariat Elder Hai had previously wanted Yao Wenyu to leave Chu capital and return to Jin City, the hometown of the Yao clan. There are students of Grand Preceptor Yao there who could watch over him on behalf of the Secretariat Elder, but Yao Wenyu didn't go. Qiao Tianya uttered an "oh" and remained standing under the eaves to watch as the rain continued to fall. Fei Sheng continued, Yao Wenyu had probably realized at that time that Secretariat Elder Hai asked him to leave because he had already made up his mind to remonstrate to the death. So, Yao Wenyu got on the carriage and circled around once before returning to wait in the residence for Secretariat Elder Hai to come back from court session. Who would have known that what he ended up with was news of Secretariat Elder Hai's death instead? Droplets of rain dampened the toes of Qiao Tianya's boots as he watched the gradually intensifying haze in the courtyard. His gaze fell upon a puddle, and he saw his own reflection. Fei Sheng paused for a moment. It was only when he observed that Qiao Tianya's expression was still normal that he continued. When Secretariat Elder was buried, tens of thousands of people came to send him off. Yao Wenyu was his only student and he conducted the funeral rites for Secretariat Elder as a son would for his own father. It didn't take a few days for the students from the Imperial Academy to start a riot where all of his books were torn entirely. If not for Kong Qiu hiding him in time, he may very well have ended up getting ripped to shreds by the students. However, he seems to have vanished into thin air after the matter of the Emperor's daughter was revealed. My informers in Chu capital couldn't find a trace of him either. Qiao Tianya shifted his gaze to him and repeated, vanished. That's right, he vanished. Fei Sheng lifted the arm he had placed against the banister and drew a circle in the air. When I escaped from Chu capital with you, I lost contact with my informers for a period of time, and I only re-established contact with them a short while back. By then, Yao Wenyu had already vanished. Chu capital is a territory that the Jin Wei are most familiar with. If my men say he disappeared, it's more than likely he's dead. Qiao Tianya immediately replied, impossible. Kong Qiu still wants to revive the moderates and Yao Wenyu is an indispensable candidate. Whether it's for official or personal reasons, Kong Qiu would never let him die. Fei Sheng stared at Qiao Tianya, waiting for him to finish before saying, my claim that he's already dead is supported by evidence. Hear me out first. Initially, he was just missing. Kong Qiu and Sen Yu were both looking for him too, but to no avail. The last place he appeared at was Mount Bodhi, where Hai Lianji was buried. When my men went to investigate, they found an abandoned carriage. He had been kidnapped. But if it was purely a kidnapping, the perpetrators would no doubt approach Kong Qiu to negotiate or, at the very least discuss the conditions for release. That is only how Yao Wenyu could be useful for a ransom. However, Kong Qiu heard nothing from them at all, and it wasn't just Kong Qiu, even the Yao clan of Jin City didn't receive news of him either. Qiao Tianya furrowed his brows. If a riot hadn't broken out in the Imperial Academy, Yao Wenyu would be the new star of the moderates, but the Yao clan suffered a drastic decline after the Imperial Academy's riot. He can no longer bear the responsibility of commanding all the students in the world. To Chu capital, he's a useless pawn. There must be a reason to kill him, but if you ask me, there was absolutely no need to. Right. Fei Sheng turned his head around and asked in puzzlement. He is without an official position or title, but he is the eldest legitimate son of the Yao clan. Killing him will only bring nothing but problems. I don't understand it either. Shen Zequan called out to them from the room. Qiao Tianya ended the conversation and lifted the drapes to enter. He never broached the subject again. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Luo Mu, for the sake of prudence, did not bring up the matter to Chai Yu directly. Instead, he coaxed his concubine until she was happy again and allowed her to follow him in and out of the study. The private letters, which were partially concealed in the study, were copied down by concubine Chai's maidservant before being surreptitiously delivered into the hands of Chai Yu. Upon seeing the letters, Chai Yu immediately flew into a rage. He summoned Luo Mu to his residence and hurled a stream of verbal abuse towards him. I thought you were an honest man, that's why I was willing to marry my sister off to you. Was there a single time that I didn't contribute generously to help you out whenever your residence faced a difficulty? I treated you like a dear brother-in-law, yet you were scheming against me behind my back. Luo Mengzheng, look at yourself. If it weren't for my support, you'd have been just a nobody. Do you really think of yourself as someone important? Chai Yu was an uneducated and crude man used to mixing around in the lowest stratum of society. He was so vulgar and coarse when he cursed that Luo Mu fell to his knees before the table to repent. Elder brother treats me well, how could I dare repay your kindness with enmity? These private letters are anonymous. I have no idea where they came from either. I've been feeling nervous and afraid, unable to sleep at night and spending the day in a daze, all just to find an opportunity to bring up this matter with elder brother. Chai Yu got even angrier. He tossed the private letters onto the desk and pointed at Luo Mu. What opportunity were you looking for? You and I are just a courtyard apart. Have you been crippled that you can't get over here? If I hadn't found out sooner, you would have already fallen into cahoots with them. Chai Yu was so furious that he felt uncomfortable. He stood up to take a few steps, repeatedly stroking his chest. You certainly are a piece of work, Luo Mengzheng. I was just wondering why there were so many people scolding me all of a sudden after spring this year. Turns out you were all trying to stab me behind my back. A shameless group of filthy trash. Back then, when I was renowned, you were all just babies who have yet to wean off milk. I always gave all sorts of financial assistance to you, yet you turn around and bite the hand that helps you. Why? Have you gotten greedy after seeing how profitable the grains are? Bah! Do you think you people are worthy of doing this business? Are you people even capable of handling it? Luo Mu was seized with terror. He wanted to speak but Chai Yu bellowed at him, keep kneeling. I showed you due respect when we're outside and thought of ways to support you, yet you don't cherish it and stubbornly choose to fraternize with those ingrates. I'm telling you, if it weren't for my younger sister's love for you, you wouldn't be going home today. Sweat was pouring from Luo Mu like rain. He kept his head lowered and said nothing. Chai Yu just sneered when he stood looking at Luo Mu's sweat-soaked back. He spent the first half of his life on knife edge, and he finally settled down now that he was older. Who didn't respectfully address him as Elder Chai each time he went out for business? All the major and minor bandits of Zongbo had to give him face, and not even Lei Changming, whom he despised to the core, dared to behave out of line before him. It was only after Luo Mu kneeled for an unknown period of time that Chai Yu's anger dissipated some. In his eyes, Luo Mu was a spineless man. If he dared to keep those letters hidden for so long, it was surely because he had been instigated by the other party. This meant the other party was genuinely plotting against him and was just about to take action towards him. Chai Yu's heart was still fluttering with trepidation, but then he thought the better of it and ended up feeling so resentful that he was gnashing his teeth in anger. He had always thought of himself as a very generous man. Even though he had taken a large cut of the profit from the grains, he had still saved a share for those under them so that they would not starve to death. But these people did not know how to be grateful. Since they're so heartless, I have no choice but to be unrighteous. Chai Yu sat down beside the window where the light was spilling through and said maliciously, "Those insatiably greedy bunches are just like snakes trying to devour an elephant. I'll catch a few and make an example out of them as a warning to the others to make them understand that this Qiang may be old, but I'm not so old that I'd subject myself to humiliation from others. While Qiang was publicly making a show of dealing with the smaller groups of bandits on one end, Shen Zequin's cold was gradually getting better on the other end. Fei Shen was very efficient in his record-taking. He not only had all the prices of goods in Xia province documented in the book but had also sent someone to Fan province to do the same. During the first few days, Shen Zequin did not spread the news that Xia province was here to trade in grains. Kongling had only gone around Xia province to buy non-local products, making it seem as though they had made the trip specially to purchase these goods. When someone came to ask about their visit, Kongling's reply was ambiguous and dismissive. After a few days, the number of people who came to probe lessened. Kongling followed Shen Zequin out to the shops owned by the Shi clan. The shops operated by the Shi clan here mainly dealt with parallel imports, rouges, and medicinal herbs. Starving refugees swarm the land outside the city, while the city remains peaceful and wealthy. Troubled times or not, the ones who suffer will always be the common people. Kongling picked up the medicinal herb, took a sniff and praised, "This is good quality stuff." Shi Hongxian was a man of foresight when it comes to business. Shen Zequin glanced around the shop. Regular people generally would not dare to open such a shop here for fear of getting robbed, or poor business. In these last few years, Zongbo can't even afford to feed itself. Who would have thought that men with power in the city would be far more extravagant than the merchants of Juexi? All that's lacking is exactly this kind of shop. Money makes the mare go. Anything is possible with money. Kongling lamented. When Shen Zequin spoke to him about Shi Hongxian, he was talking about his own money vaults. Kongling understood the weight behind his words. This was recognition for taking his side in Xie province. Kongling felt his chest tighten, thinking that he had been far too impulsive that day. As the saying goes, one should hide his inadequacies by staying quiet. It was not a good thing to display his own intelligence before a brilliant master. Kongling did not reply and played dumb, and so Shen Zequin did not continue the conversation. He took a look at the accounts for a moment and carefully asked the shopkeepers about news on Juexi's end. The shopkeepers presented him with some trinkets as a tribute of respect, but Shen Zequin rejected the jade items and the likes and merely accepted a fan that had caught his eye. However, he had already gotten accustomed to the fan Xiao Qiye had gifted him, and it did not feel quite right to be holding this new fan in his palm. While he could make do with this fan, he was still counting on Xiao Qiye to not forget about the matter when he returned. ******. The rain finally ceased in Xia province, but it started to fall in Libei. While the weather in Zongbo was still hot, Libei was already starting to turn cool. With the winds picking up in the 7th month, it would get colder after the end of the rainy season. Ever since receiving Xiao Fangxiu's letter, Xiao Qiye had been in a bad mood. He was still stationed at the Shazhen camp but had set up a patrol range with the Bianbo camp, taking both camps under his watch and keeping his guard up on all sides. Wu Ziyu was initially going to send the battle steeds up north after 3 days, but he had already been delaying it for some days. He couldn't leave on his own and had to follow Xiao Qiye. After receiving the letter, Xiao Qiye was now the commanding general in charge of military supplies in Libei. Wu Ziyu did not have a say no matter where he went. He had to listen to the deployment orders of the respective division's quartermasters. Xiao Qiye came down from the walls of the camp and headed back to the tent in the rain. The sky was about to darken, and the mess cook was banging a pot as a signal for mealtime. The Libei armored cavalry and the imperial army were like chalk and cheese as they each squatted on one side with their backs facing the other. On one hand, the Libei armored cavalry, having tasted successive defeats, could not get past the humiliation and were thus awfully on edge. On the other hand, the ways of the imperial army were rather unorthodox, and everyone was an old hand at cracking jokes and jesting around. They had few rules to follow once they stripped off their armors, and they were all a playful bunch who loved their fun. This was not something the Libai armored cavalry could agree with. Xiao Qiye received a handkerchief from Chen Yang to wipe his sweat. The tent was wide open, and the drapes were not lowered, or it would be too stuffy inside. Before he could sit down, he saw Gu Jin enter. "Master, young master's letter is here." Xiao Qiye took it and raised a hand as a signal for them to leave. He brewed himself tea and drank it as he unwrapped the bundle that was neither too big nor too small. There was nothing much inside, just a neat stack of clothes under a bulging bag. He paid no attention to the clothing, but opened the bag first. The bag contained only 2 items inside, a bunch of pressed, dried orange jasmine, and a letter. The letter was a little damp after being soaked for a long time. When Xiao Qiye picked it up, he could still smell the scent of flowers. He drank up the tea in one gulp, then opened the letter. The letter was short. By the time Xiao Qiye finished reading it, he had already swallowed his tea. He turned his head towards the entrance of the tent, where Chen Yang and Gu Jin stood still and said with composure, "Lower the drapes. I'm cold." Gu Jin wanted to ask, "Didn't you find it ridiculously stuffy just a moment ago?" But Chen Yang had already removed the hooks and let the drapes down. The moment the drapes shielded him from view, Xiao Qiye read the letter over and over again. Finally, he collapsed heavily onto the bed and held up the letter, reading it word for word. "Days have passed since we parted, I know you yearn for me. So, here's a little gift to comfort you with. Touching it is akin to touching me." Xiao Qiye stared at that line of text and repeated it once more. "Touching it is akin to touching me." Xiao Qiye's throat felt dry. He inexplicably started laughing, his gaze a little fierce. Written at the very bottom in light and cursive calligraphy were the words, "It's hard to sleep by my lonesome self. When will you return? A good night's sleep is only possible when you hold me in your arms." Xiao Qiye loosened his grip and gazed towards the ceiling. Half a moment later, he flipped himself over and buried his face into the pillow. But it was as though Shenzhequan was lying right next to him, nibbling his ear and whispering in that lazy, languid way of his, "A good night's sleep is only possible when you hold me in your arms." End chapter. Qiang Jin Jiu. Book 2, Other Heroes of Chaos. Chapter 138, Strategist. When Shenzhequan woke up in the morning, the day was just starting to break. After Shenzhequan had his breakfast, he boarded the carriage and headed back to the cosmetics shop with Kong Ling. It was still business as usual in the front hall. Qiao Tianya and Fei Sheng stood guard in the courtyard, while the Jin Yi kept careful surveillance both inside and outside the shop. Half an hour later, Luo Mu's sedan arrived too. He was wearing his usual attire, a deep red robe with a slanted collar. The shopkeeper at the front desk was sharp. Seeing as the attendants following behind Luo Mu were unfamiliar, he raised his voice and said, "It'll be scorching hot soon, and it'll be tough on you all to be standing outside. Men, lead these brothers into the room for some tea and a rest." Those few attendants exchanged glances. Presuming that Luo Mu would not be able to escape, they followed the shop assistant into a room. After entering, they insisted on hanging the curtains up so that they could keep an eye on the entrance of the front hall. The shop assistant followed beside Luo Mu and offered a handkerchief to Luo Mu to wipe his hands. Luo Mu wiped his hands as per usual and took a look at the goods on the counter. The shopkeeper greeted him with a courteous smile and said, "The last time Your Excellency came by, we didn't have all the goods. This time we have prepared them well in advance. There are even new jade pieces and trinkets that have just arrived from the east. They are all in the back. This way, please." Luo Mu appeared to be hesitating as he cast a glance at the attendants. The shop assistant continued, "This short distance will not take too much effort. Some goods are hard to come by, it's not very convenient to bring them to the front for you to choose from, and it doesn't look good on you when you view them there." Only then did Luo Mu reluctantly nod and follow the shopkeeper to the courtyard at the back. Jiao Tianya personally drew the curtains. Luo Mu said his thanks and bent over to enter. He first paid his obeisances to Shen Zequin, then looked at Kong Ling. It was only after seeing that both their expressions were relaxed that he took his seat. Shen Zequin noted that Luo Mu was dressed as a scholar today and presumed that he must have chosen his clothes and shoes carefully before leaving the house. Although he sat impeccably upright after entering, he would subconsciously look at Kong Ling wherever there was a conversation. The moment Kong Ling opened his mouth, Luo Mu's eyes would be fixed on him. Chai Yu has been going all out to hit out at the smaller groups of bandits in these past days, but he knows not to go too far. He understands the principle of interdependency given that they share a common lot. If one falls, the other will be in danger too, and he also fears he will end up isolated by all if he crosses the line. So at the same time he strikes out at the smaller gangs, he attempts to win over the remaining younger generation by offering low-priced grains to help the masses. As Shen Zequin was at the side, Luo Mu was already trying to hold his gaze in check. This approach is to sell the grains cheaply to the gangs who had not been stirring up trouble. Kong Ling asked, "How much is that?" Luo Mu answered, "1 tael for 5 dough of grains." Kong Ling smiled and said, "The price isn't really that lowered. His so-called low-priced grains merely means he makes just a tiny bit less profit than the others out there. Chai Yu used to be generous in helping the needy, and he never used to think much of money and worldly possessions, but he's so miserly now that he's grown older. At this price, the grains could not be called low-priced grains at all. Instead, they ought to be called expensive grains." Cha Zhou's current rate for the grains was 1 tael of silver for 2 dough of rice, while the rate in Chu capital was 1 tael of silver for 2 dan of rice. Chai Yu was making big commission off the profits. Moreover, it was profit that forced the common folks into dead ends. To think he merely changed it to 1 tael of silver for 5 dough of rice just to win over the others. It was clear he was hankering over the money and could not bear to drop the price too much. Shen Zequin brushed aside the floating foam in his tea and said, "Chai Yu is in a predicament too, with no way to back down. Everyone inside and outside the city is now complaining about the high price of the grains. If he were to drop the price drastically to win those smaller groups of bandits over to his side, the common folks would hate him even more, so naturally he wouldn't dare to do so. It's not just Jia province. Public wrath is running high even in Fan province." Luo Mu was the most acquainted with Chai Yu's business. At the beginning of this year, Lei Changming broke off contact with the Yan clan for some unknown reason, and Yan Hiru no longer gave financial aid to the bandits from Mount Luo. That was why they thought of seizing Xe province and robbing Xe province's granary. Part of the reason was that they could not afford Chai Yu's grains. "Let Chai Yu sell for a few days first." Shen Zequin turned over his folding fan and tapped it lightly against the table. "It doesn't matter if it's 1 tael for 2 dough, or 1 tael for 5 dough, the common folks and the smaller bandits all can't afford it." Chai Yu forced himself to show such kindness naturally because he hopes those under him will acquiesce to him and stop opposing him. But his attitude isn't humble enough, and this will only backfire on him. "It's not just the common folks," Kong Ling lamented. "Even governmental officials can't afford to buy with their monthly salary issued by the imperial court. On our way here, we saw people selling themselves everywhere outside Cha province, even to the extent of selling off all the children in the family in the hope that they would have a chance to live. People aren't worth much nowadays, and even if they sell the children, it's all at low prices." Luo Mu had long heard of this. Besides, who in Zongbo will be willing to spend money to buy the people given the present situation? Only the brothels in Fan province will be willing to take them in. And even if they sell down someone from a decent origin into a low-class trade, the money won't be enough for them to exchange for 1 dough of rice. Shen Zequin was still not familiar with the situation in Fan province, so he asked, "Since Fan province has difficulty feeding its people, then where does it get the money to operate all these brothels?" Luo Mu answered, "They are run by bandits too, for the specific purpose of dealing in the flesh trade with the bandits from Mount Luo and the prefecture of Deng province. Prices are extremely low, and even this bit of profit is all swallowed up by the procuresses of the brothels. Perplexed, Kong Ling asked, but they have to feed all those people they brought back to do business, right? Do they buy grains from Qiang, too? Luo Mu shook his head. Humans are worth less than dogs. They are fed swill and weeds. If they starve to death, the bandits can come and buy more again. Anyway, the prices are so cheap that they won't suffer any losses either way. Kong Ling sat in a daze. Anguish gradually came over his face. Zongbo has been reduced to such a state. If the imperial court had been willing to lend a helping hand, the situation would not have deteriorated to this point. I said many years back that Hua Saiqian. Shen Wei's name was still wedged in his throat. Knowing Kong Ling well, Luo Mu feared he would say something unfavorable and leave a bad taste in Shen Zequin's mouth, thus he hurriedly switched the subject and said, so what should be the next step according to Vice Commander's plans? However, Shen Zequin replied with, if Shen Wei had not cowered and recoiled from battle, Zongbo would not have been so badly defeated. I hold Mr. Chengfeng in the highest esteem for his concern for the common people, so there is no need to make a special point of avoiding certain subjects. Shen Zequin was so sincere that Luo Mu felt embarrassed instead. Kong Ling felt his heart sink. He had recently been both following and avoiding Shen Zequin. He was a clever man. He was willing to work for Zhou Gui because he was familiar with Zhou Gui's character. However, he still felt some unease towards Shen Zequin, and one of the biggest reasons was that he thought that following Shen Zequin was a dangerous move. Masters that were difficult to read were the hardest to serve. The calmer things appeared to be, the more he had to tread with caution. Kong Ling could side with him, but he was unwilling to assist Shen Zequin the way he supported Zhou Gui. Shen Zequin had been dropping hints repeatedly this entire trip, but Kong Ling feigned ignorance and turned a blind eye to it all. And now, he was filled with even more trepidation when he saw how Shen Zequin was not only not angry but even giving him a way out. Seeing the changes in Kong Ling's expression, Shen Zequin gently turned over his fan and paused for a moment before speaking. Suppress the news that Tse province is here to sell grains for a few more days. Wait until the bandits prioritize their own interests and are no longer willing to be pushed around by Qiang before releasing the news. When that happens, keep the reserved grain wagons from entering the city. We'll set up the porridge booth right outside of the city. Tell the refugees that Tse province is here to sell the grains at a regular price. Luo Mu probed, what if they have no money? Shen Zequin smiled and looked towards Luo Mu. Isn't this all funds for Cha province's future garrison troops and wasteland reclamation? The common people may be poor, but you've acquired quite the sum of money while sticking to Qiang. Furthermore, once Qiang is out of the picture, most of his family assets will fall into your excellency's hands. Use those taels to do business with Tse province in exchange for winning the people's hearts, and that would solve your excellency's future problems. Now, I still need to remind your excellency that Tse province is here to do business, not to tighten its belts just so it can offer financial aid to others. Sweat materialized on Luo Mu's forehead. He dabbed a little of it off with a handkerchief, nodding as he said, but of course. But of course. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. When Shen Zequin returned to the courtyard this time, he did not return with Kong Ling. Qiao Tianya, with a bamboo hat on his head, sat at the head of the horse carriage with both arms behind his head as a pillow. He said on the other side of the curtain, does master not want him any more? Unable to stand the heat, Shen Zequin closed his eyes in the stuffy interior to take a rest. He listened to the peddlers hawking their wares along the street for a moment before he said, I've tried both carrot and stick, but he's determined to turn me down. With a young stalk of grass between his lips, Qiao Tianya said, that's to be expected. He has been lying low and hiding his abilities in your presence all this while because he fears being coerced. After he graduated from the academy, he did not go along with Zhou Gui and Luo Mu to join the imperial court as an official. He had simply wanted to be a commoner. Men like him are natural-born strategists. His only pride is the ability to choose his own future. Shenzequan opened his eyes partially. It's not like he's my only option. Shenzequan did not want to impose his will on Kongling and force him into it, but he really lacked manpower. At first, he thought that the pair of Kongling and Zhou Gui were the best arrangement. Both men, when put together, could maintain the stability on one end. At the very least, it would not be a problem for them to maintain the stability in Tse province. But now, Shenzequan was lacking a talent who could give counsel. What he lacked was no longer a pair of eyes or a pair of hands, but a strategist who could assist him in devising strategic and tactical plans for the overall game. Kongling had quite the reputation in Zongbo for his talents. He was a fellow student with both Zhou Gui and Luo Mu. With just his personal friendships with both men, he would be able to assist Shenzequan with many issues in both the prefectures of Tse province and Sha province, just like how he was able to deliver a visitation card to pay Luo Mu a visit outright. He also had the social connections he had built up in the Dun province army from his time as Tan Taihu's advisor. As long as these people were still alive, they could be of use in the future. Besides, Shenzequan did not think highly of Kongling back then. When Lei Jingzhi plotted to trick them, Kongling had been so easily deceived. But that shout Kongling made before the city of Tse province made Shenzequan take note of him once again. It was not until Kongling had swiftly taken his side right before they set off for Cha province that Shenzequan fully set his mind on taking Kongling into his employ. But Kongling did not have the intention to swap masters. Shenzequan was too young. His background not only left much to be desired, but he also studied under Qi Huilian. Qi Huilian had been through many ups and downs in Chu capital, and he also served as the head of the Eastern Palace for many years. What kind of student would such a teacher produce? Qi Huilian was the emperor's teacher. Kongling simply did not dare to continue thinking further. The most crucial thing was that he feared Shenzequan and he was unable to trust Shenzequan. In Kongling's eyes, Shenzequan was a cold-hearted man who could readily cast aside personal relationships. If it had been Zhou Gui today, he would never speak of such words to Luo Mu. Vexed, Shenzequan raised his head to look at the curtain of the carriage that was swaying because of the jolts and bumps. Sunlight flickered through the gaps onto his knees and blossomed over that particular patch of his white robe. After Qi Huilian's death, Shenzequan wore white. He never asked Xiao Tianya where Han Cheng placed his teacher's body after he left Chu capital. His anguished wails that night were known only to Xiao Qiye, but the names of Shui Ziaozuo, Han Cheng, and the Empress Dowager, along with the city walls of Chu capital that had been stained red in that pouring rain, were all seared into Shenzequan's heart and mind. He had to stand firm. He needed a strategist. Shenzequan said to himself silently. A strategist who could stand up to Shui Ziaozuo as an equal. End chapter.